Hey guys, this is I think the third series in my B8 and/or accuracy series. I'm talking about the bullseye, but really what I'm going to be talking about during this video is applicable not just to this particular bullseye, but any kind of accuracy equation. There are, I guess, three main errors that people engage in that cause their accuracy to suffer. And I talked a little bit about some of those before, and I won't beat them up too much, but when it comes to accuracy, if the sights are on target, our grip is pretty good, and we press the trigger smoothly to the rear, then the bullet goes exactly where you wanted it. The problem is often when we are pressing the trigger at some point when the firing pin moves forward because it's either departed the trigger bar or the hammer has struck it, depending on whatever kind of pistol you've got. At that point, it sets off a series of events inside the gun. And that series of events, there's like probably a good 5 or 7 things that are happening inside that gun, depending on who you talk to. And those things, like I said, happen in microseconds. They happen really, really fast. What often happens is that we are somewhat acclimated to the fact that the gun is going to go bang. And we have a natural reaction to close our eyes, tighten our grip, and perhaps engage in some physical behaviors that cause us to lose sight of what the gun is doing during that time. And if at any time during that series of events we disrupt where the gun is pointed, then the bullet goes somewhere other than where we thought we were going to shoot it. Now, one of the things that I see with new shooters is kind of their difficulty in figuring out what the gun did, i.e. recoil, versus what they did, or flinching, slapping the trigger, whatever you want to call it. I know that John McPhee is a proponent of there's no such thing as trigger slap. Maybe. Tom Givens is of the opinion that there might be. I am of the opinion that anything you do that moves the gun before the gun goes bang fits into that broad category, however you want to define it. So I'm not going to call it one thing or the other. Let's just call it pre-ignition reaction. Probably too much. Maybe we'll call it flinch. We'll just say it's flinch. So most people can use the sights okay, and I talked about what the sights should look like in a previous video and even showed you those sights. I'll link to it or put a card up or something for that video. So that's not a problem. For grip, and I've got an empty gun here, but for grip, I want to hold the gun firmly with my strong hand and more formally with my support hand. And there are numerous videos and books that tell you how to grip a gun, so I won't go deep into that either. And then, when it comes to the trigger itself, for most of these guns, there is a substantive amount of pre-travel, like that part that you get to before you ever actually cause the gun to go bang. If you take out all of that pre-travel and then you press the trigger smoothly to the rear, then typically the gun does not move overly much. I did hear one guy say that if you took like 80% of the force on the trigger out before we actually start our press, that you could not flinch. And I have seen people prove that wrong so many times that I'm not inclined to agree with that. I will say that if you take up a whole lot of slack before we even begin our press, well, it does not remove your opportunity to flinch or anticipate, but it removes a lot of it. It reduces that window, but it does not close it. Understand that most of these triggers got a lot of take up, guys. If in your brain you manage the trigger like all I'm doing is taking up the slack, and you just continue to do that through the entire press, then we tend to not disrupt the gun. So the trigger itself is kind of part of our mental process to make this gun hit where I want it to hit. What I usually tell students is that, hey, aim in, take up the slack. Okay, now take up some more slack, and then take up some more, and then eventually we get to the actual trigger press. If we can get it in our brain that we're just adding pressure to the trigger and not making it go bang, I think that's a good kind of marker, like that hurdle to get over in your mind. The thing is this though, with all those things happening and us pressing the trigger and us knowing it's going to go bang, it's very easy for us, like right last second, to go, oh, it's going to go bang, and we increase our grip and then we press the trigger. And so for those of you who've ever shot low, low left, low right, depending on what hand you're shooting with, that's probably what's happening. It's just not so much what you're doing to disrupt the gun from this, although that's part of it, but it's more what you're doing to disrupt the gun from this, and that's the real big issue. Certainly you can disrupt any gun by virtue of your input on the trigger. I know that people say, well, you can't overcome the entirety of your grip with one finger, but when the gun itself does not weigh as much as it takes to press the trigger to the rear, a 3-pound gun with a 5-pound trigger, then your opportunity to disrupt this gun, it's definitely there. When you look at a lot of precision rifles, they typically weigh anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds, maybe more, depending on optics. And if you're talking about a really long range rifle and you've got like a 1 to 2 pound trigger, your opportunity to disrupt that rifle substantively with that trigger, once again, still there, but much reduced by virtue of those numbers. Pistols don't have that going for them, so I still have to be smooth on the trigger. But if you're saying, well, what's happening when I'm pressing the trigger and all these things are happening and I'm not seeing it, which is often the case for a newer shooter, right? They're not able to discern the difference between what they're doing and what the gun's doing because of all of that speed. Then we kind of have to come up with some way to peel those layers apart. And the easy way that I know of to do it is to take some dummy rounds, load your magazine, some live, some dummy. This obviously will occur on the range, but that exercise is called ball and dummy. Maybe you've tried it before. And the idea is this, is that when I am shooting and I'm pressing the trigger, if the gun doesn't go bang and I was engaging in any of that pre-ignition behavior, it'll come out. You'll see the gun move very heavily, and there's no bang or recoil to distract you from the input that you put in the gun. Ideally, when you're doing this with your target, you're going to go hit some live, hit some dummy, hit some live, hit some dummy. And it should be in an order that you didn't anticipate. So make sure you randomly mix them. And if you're watching, then you'll see the gun move. If you didn't see it move even when it clicked, that's another clue that you're closing your eyes before the gun goes bang, which is also a very common occurrence. The problem with the human eye blink is it's so fast, sometimes it's hard for us to tell that we have blinked at all. Sometimes I ask students when I see some round that's pretty far off target somewhere, I'll ask them, hey, what did you see with that round? Like, did you see the sights go over there? And if they say, typically, I'm not sure, or they waffle around, because nobody wants to tell me outright no, then I already know the answer is no, they blinked. And nothing criminal, but understand that that is your clue as well. If you're losing rounds because you weren't seeing the gun at that time, then you're blinking, increasing your grip, and doing those things. So work with the ball and dummy some. Now, once you've gotten to the point where you get no gun movement at all when you hit a dummy, and you can do that repeatedly, not sporadically. So you've made the first step at that point. The next step is typically to do it with some time urgency, because slow fire gives you the opportunity to be very, very patient with each trigger press. Once we start putting it on the clock, then we can start to see that movement again. So once again, you'll have to put yourself on the clock and kind of relearn it again at speed. And I'm not saying go crazy fast, like, 6 rounds in 2 seconds, but some of the police quals, like 2 rounds, 3 seconds at 7 yards, I think that's a pretty good opportunity, because we can certainly see the sights and press each time during that sort of time frame. And if the gun moves substantively during one of those trigger presses because you hit a dummy, then you know you need to clean everything up. Now, ball and dummy is not the end-all be-all, but I find for most shooters, working with some live and some dummies on the range is super helpful in starting to overcome those pre-ignition tendencies. Guys, when it comes to your dummies, I really recommend you get something that looks like a dummy round and cannot be readily confused with live ammunition. I'm aware of at least 2 instances where people were working with supposedly only dummies and real ammunition snuck in. However it snuck in, I can't say why, how, or whatever. In one case, there was an injury, not death, but there was an injury associated with it In the other, there was a very near miss, and it probably would have been a real injury if it had been any closer. So be careful with that. For the most part, guys, I really only like to use dummies on the range for that reason. If you want to do some real basic malfunction clearance, like in your basement, if you got a safe direction, I think that's okay. But you need to be very circumspect with your practice in that regard. I forgot the distance that you practice at. Pick a distance where your accuracy errors start to become evident. If you're shooting stuff small at 3 yards and you're not really seeing a lot of deviation, whatever range you start to see rounds going places, maybe 5, maybe 7, maybe 10 yards, that's the distance that I really think you need to practice when it comes to your ball and dummy practice. You'll see a lot that way. I think it'll help you. I've got some footage, so you'll see some of my footage where I'm doing the right thing on the gun and the wrong thing. So watch those. You should be able to see when you're actually looking on your sight or through your sights anytime the gun moves. If you're getting to the point where you can do that, then you can actually start calling your shots. As soon as you know where the sights were when the gun went bang, then you will automatically know where the bullet went, no matter what distance you're shooting at. If you're shooting beyond the distance where you can readily see bullet holes, the sights will have told you the story. You just have to trust them. And I will tell you that when it comes to the sights are the truth. And when it comes to dummies in the mag, those tend to be the truth as well. Because when we hit a dummy, anything that happens on the gun, we know with 100% brutal honesty that it had nothing to do with recoil. That was all us. Guys, this video took a long time for me to put out compared to some of my previous ones, because obviously I had to get some additional footage. I'll put links to the dummy rounds that I like because they're high visibility. And hopefully that's been helpful to you. There's one more hurdle that I think I want to cover when it comes to transitioning perfect dry fire to perfect live fire, but I think that's the subject for yet another video, and I apologize for that. Hopefully this video has been helpful to you. I hope that you get the opportunity to get on the range and actually play with a little bit of ball and dummy. I think it'll clean you up a lot if you have had any marksmanship errors or issues in the past. Let me know how it goes. Either comment or shoot me an email. And speaking of comments, guys, any thumbs ups always help. Subscriptions obviously are always appreciated, guys. So if you're not subscribed, please do. I'm going to continue to throw out a lot of content, and some of it gun related, obviously. I appreciate you guys. Take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Get him, Jay.